the issues affecting Asia's animals, and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Welcome everyone to this episode of the AFA's podcast, Compassion and Balance Asia. Today's episode is brought to you by CIB Asia, the newest working group of Asia for Animals Coalition. CIB Asia is a special collaboration between AFA and the Compassion and Balance program founded by Jessica Dolce. We know that there is a silently spreading well-being crisis in the animal protection movement across Asia and beyond. Empathy fatigue, burnout, and related stresses are rife, and those who are dedicating their lives to help end animal suffering are bearing the brunt. Through CIB Asia, we aim to help people working in animal protection know what signs to look out for, what it could mean, and how one can tackle this ever-growing crisis. This partnership also brings tools, resources, and a training course where you can attend for free. Please stay on to find out more on how to access the resource platform. Today, we have a couple of guests joining us in our podcast. Let us hear a little and learn a little bit more about them now. Jessica, would you like to go first?
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be with all of you. So, my name is Jessica Dolce, and I've worked in animal care and welfare for over 20 years now. And about 10 years ago, I became a certified compassion fatigue educator. And today, my sole focus is on supporting animal care, welfare, and protection workers through education, helping them to manage the impact of working in high stress and trauma exposed environments. And one of the main ways that I do that work is through my online training platform called the Compassion and Balance Program. I also teach well-being courses for the shelter medicine program at the University of Florida. And I'm just really honored to have this opportunity to talk with both of you today and all of your listeners so we can do some good work and help the helpers.
Vidaya, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Winaya. I began my professional journey with Asia for Animals. I took the role of the coordinator for the Social Media Animal Cruelty Coalition, one of the organization's key working groups. My passion lies on animal studies. It has been a lifelong commitment as well. It sparked when I was still a kid and solidified over the years. And after exploring various interests, I feel like my focus would be on the human animal relationship. And leading the SMAC team has been an eye opening experience. It deepens my understanding of animal advocacy because my background was actually quite scientific. I continue to apply the knowledge gained from my studies, of course. It has been very helpful, and I'm always eager to learn more and grow in my work.
Thank you very much, both, for your introduction. Today, the session will hear of some of the struggles and challenges of Vinaya, who works in a very demanding environment in dealing with animal cruelty on social media. You will also hear insights and strategies that will help her cope in such distressing situations. Before that, I feel it'd be useful for us to learn of the differentiation between terms like burnout, stress, and compassion fatigue. Jessica, can you help explain it a little bit more to our listeners?
Yeah, so this will take a couple of minutes. So everybody get comfortable. We'll start with compassion fatigue. That has been described as the cost of caring for others, animals and people who are in pain. My cat just jumped on my microphone. I'm sorry if you could hear that. um, and so the working definition that I like to use is that compassion fatigue is the profound emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual depletion that arises due to the demands of working in an intense caregiving environment in which the helpers feel the pain, stress, and emotions of others And ultimately, over time, that causes a decline in their ability to feel empathy and, behave in a caring way towards others. So it really should be called empathy fatigue, not compassion fatigue. But I think most people who work with animals in various jobs, they tend to understand that definition, like that description makes sense for them in their experience, because we know that the work that we do requires us to open our hearts and our minds to animals and sometimes people who are suffering and who are traumatized. And that opening of ourselves towards their pain is what makes us vulnerable to being very profoundly affected and hurt by our work. And the hard part is that we need empathy and we need to connect with animals and people. That's an essential skill that we need to be able to maintain in order to be effective and ethical and compassionate in our work. So it's really challenging to kind of find this balance of empathy where we can open our hearts enough and still protect ourselves. I think this is something that most people I know, most helpers, struggle with this at various times in their careers. So I think what is always important for all of us to know is that compassion fatigue is a very predictable consequence of working in any helping profession where you're caring for animals or people who are suffering. It's really an occupational hazard. And when we think of it that way, it's important that we think of it that way because compassion fatigue is not an individual weakness or a shortcoming. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, and it's not a mental illness either. It's really a very predictable and normal response to the stress of what we're exposed to in our work, especially when we're not able to restore ourselves and we're so depleted. So that's one definition. And then in terms of how that might differ from something like vicarious trauma or burnout, I mean, the terms are very complementary. There's a lot of overlap, but they are different from each other. So while compassion fatigue is referring to a very profound emotional and physical erosion that takes place over time when we're not able to refuel or regenerate from all of this caring that we're doing for other living beings who are in pain. The term vicarious trauma describes a profound shift in our worldview that occurs for helping professionals when they're working with animals and people who have experienced trauma. So helpers will start to notice that their fundamental beliefs about the world start to change. Or sometimes we don't even notice, but our beliefs are changing and maybe even are becoming damaged by repeatedly being exposed to indirect trauma over months and years. And so that exposure over time to trauma through our interactions, either directly with traumatized animals or, indirectly through the traumatic materials that we work with, like when we're working with content on social media, or if we're putting together court evidence, like if there's a trial, if there's been a cruelty case, when we're exposed to trauma that way, either way, it can change our core beliefs about who we are, whether the world or elements of the world are safe or dangerous, and whether other people can be good or trustworthy. And so then it's a shift towards burnout. And that's a term that's used to describe kind of like a physical and emotional exhaustion that any worker can experience when they have low job satisfaction, they feel powerless, they feel overwhelmed at work. And the World Health Organization defines burnout as being characterized by three specific dimensions. It's feeling this energy depletion or exhaustion, an increased mental distance from our job, or feeling very cynical related to our job, and or reduced professional efficacy, this sense of powerlessness. And so what's important to understand here is that burnout is stemming from interactions with our working conditions, but it's not specific to the type of work that we're doing as helping professionals. So it really can happen to anyone in any job. And it doesn't necessarily mean that our worldview has been changed or damaged the way that might occur with vicarious trauma. And it does not mean that we've lost our ability to feel empathy for others, which is what we're talking about with compassion fatigue. And then, your question about stress. Stress is burnout. I think people use burnout as a way to talk about stress, but it's not just stress. It is prolonged stress with very high demands without enough resources to cope with those demands. So it's too much and not enough at the same time. And if our workers, if we're in a leadership role, if many of our staff members are experiencing burnout, we really need to be looking at our working conditions. This is not really an individual issue as much as a workplace issue. So if we are just talking about stress, then even stress is nuanced. A very basic technical definition is stress is the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. But stress can be really healthy for us. It gets a bad reputation, but stress can be really good. When we're faced with moderate challenges, moderate level changes, we perceive that we have the resources to cope with that kind of challenge, we're going to experience a healthy activation, healthy stress or eustress. And that activating energy helps us to be effective at our jobs. It helps us to focus and perform. So we do want some stress. The goal is not to be stress-free, but what we're typically talking about when we're talking about stress being a problem is there's usually a pattern happening that the stress is chronic or prolonged, it's extreme or unpredictable in nature, and we're really struggling to cope with it. And that's when stress actually turns into something more like distress. And if it's related specifically to our working conditions, then it's possible we're talking about burnout, that kind of ongoing stress without the resources to cope. So to wrap that up, anyone who's working in a helping profession can experience all of these things at the same time. The symptoms overlap quite a bit. It can be really hard to make a distinction between the different, experiences that we might be having. So it's not always super important to be able to distinguish between all of these, except for one thing. If we can get a little clarity around what it is that we're experiencing, it can help us understand what specifically is contributing to us experiencing these outcomes. So it is important for us to have some awareness around what is specifically what the factors are that are contributing to our stress or distress. So for example, is your primary source of stress related to your working conditions, like working really long hours or, being understaffed? Or is it more because of the volume of care that you're giving to animals every day and those animals are in pain or they're stressed? Or is it more about interacting with traumatic materials or even having a more direct experience of trauma through your work? When we can figure that out, it can give us clues about what we might need in terms of help and support. And I think it's also important just to say that compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout, they can potentially, not always, but it is possible for them to lead to more serious problems like clinical depression or anxiety or suicidal ideations. And so when that happens, or if that happens, you really deserve to have help and support. And that's when it's very important that we're talking with a professional, whether that's a doctor or a counselor, or even just reaching out to other people who might be able to connect you with resources that are available in your specific community. So that was a lot. I'm going to be quiet now, but that's the fastest I can define all of those things.
Thank you, Jessica. Nah, that was not a lot. I mean, it is important to have some kind of understanding between the differentiation. But I think, yes, I agree. Like, as what you said, it is even more important to have that clarity and awareness towards these different factors that are affecting us emotionally from our work. Well, now, after all the definitions and explanations, I think we're all eager to hear from Vinaya's sharing. Take it over, Vinaya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jessica, for explaining a lot of new terms for me, especially with compassion fatigue. I have never heard of that before I joined Asia for Animals. So this is a very mindful knowledge for me, especially since I am working on online animal cruelty. And one of the things that I have to do is to frequently look for online animal cruelty that our volunteers have collated for us. So you can imagine, the cruelty that I have seen. I often need more time to, de-stress myself because I found myself crying out of nowhere. So sometimes it's quite hard for me to keep it professional and not feeling sad. I do think that I sleep fine, but what I am worried about is what would happen if I become desensitized to that sort of content because I keep seeing it every day, not only for work, but also on my individual time, quality time, because everyone really uses social media nowadays. And sometimes cruelty content for animals is not exactly visible to everyone. It's quite ambiguous. So sometimes I feel like I cannot distinguish between what is cruelty and what is not. And again, this type of content is everywhere and it can pop into our feed at any time. And sometimes I do feel like there's nothing that we can do to stop this. What happens if I start to normalize guilty content from within myself just because I grow accustomed to it? Is this some sort of compassion fatigue as well?
Yeah. So at first, I just want to say I think it's normal to feel sad, and I think it's professional. I hear this from a lot of people that they feel like it's not professional for them to be sad or cry at work, but I think that's such a normal response to seeing horrific cruelty, which is an abnormal thing. And so I'm just wanting to say that because I think it's just a human response. And the fact that you do feel sad and you do experience crying sometimes at work, it just means that you're still connected to your empathy, and that's a good thing. And so, if over time you do notice that you're starting to feel numb or desensitized, towards this content, that could potentially be a sign of compassion fatigue. Just noticing that numbness, I think, is a really important piece of information about how we're feeling. And again, it just points us towards what we might need. So, for example, if you start to notice that maybe you're minimizing the pain of others or you're becoming really desensitized to the cruelty that you see, it might, and I can't say for sure, but it could be a sign that you're overwhelmed by it. That sometimes we become desensitized because we're so saturated. I think of us like a sponge, and we're soaking up so much trauma and these stories and images. And we're so saturated with that and the pain that we start to shut everything out to protect ourselves. When a sponge is saturated, it can't take in any more water. So we start to, just kind of check out and numb out. And it's not because we don't care. It's because at one point we cared so, so much. And the pain is kind of overwhelming for us. And so this is a way of coping. So this could just be information. Doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It's just information that we may need to adjust the way that we're working, how we're engaging with traumatic content. It could mean that it's time for us to reach out for some help. So we have a safe outlet to process what we've been exposed to. I think of it as wringing out the sponge. Where does that trauma go? Where is it stored in our bodies? How can we release it? How can we let the stories go? So it may just be a sign that we need to get some support. One of the most effective ways of reducing our own experience of indirect or secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, is to reduce the volume of trauma that we're exposed to. So when our job is to look at traumatic content all day, we need to be really mindful of how we do set boundaries with that content, with social media, to do our best to protect ourselves so we have, the ability to keep doing this really difficult work. So it is true that traumatic images and videos will just pop up on our social feeds, even our personal social media. And we really can't always be prepared for that. But I do think that we have a little bit more control over how and when we engage with social media than we might realize. So, for example, we might choose to have a very different feed for our professional versus our personal lives. I know some people who work in animal welfare that the only pages or people that they follow on social media are people who grow flowers or hike big mountains or, have some sort of hobby that almost guarantees that they're not going to see any photos or videos of animals when they log on to social media. So it might be something kind of extreme about changing the way who we subscribe to and blocking pages and people that, tend to post content, whether it's content that really is traumatic or it's kind of, the way that you're relating to any photos or content of animals. We just may not be able to follow those people for a little while. It could also just be changing the timing of how we interact with it. So maybe making an effort not to check social media at night after work, closer to bed, just seeing what we can do to reduce the randomness of how we're exposed to traumatic content. We can make an effort, whether it's professional or personal, to not look at any graphic content when we're tired. So we know that our brains are less effective at processing traumatic material when we're really tired. So whether that's making an effort to just stay off of social media at night or when we have to look, like you do for work, is there a way to make an effort to look at the very worst content as early as possible in the day? So, our brain is a little bit more effective at processing it. Maybe it's less likely to disrupt the quality of our sleep, maybe less nightmares, that sort of thing. The internet itself is never going to set boundaries for us. It's going to always ambush us with trauma. So I think we need to get creative and serious about setting any boundaries that we can to protect ourselves. That might even mean not being on social media in your personal life at all, if that's what it takes to really allow yourself time every day to be able to decompress, for your nervous system to settle down after looking at such terrible content all day. But there needs to be a point where your body and your nervous system feel safe to relax and not hypervigilant that you might be, surprised by random traumatic content as you're trying to enjoy your life in your free time. I do share a few other tips for staying safer when we're looking at traumatic content at work in that free mini course that Eileen mentioned at the beginning. So we'll tell everybody about that at the end of the podcast. But there are different ways to even manipulate how you're looking at the content to minimize the fullness of your exposure, whether that's turning the volume down or blocking out certain elements of the photos, but being very mindful of how much of this image or how much of this video do I need to look at in order to get my job done? Because again, the higher our exposure levels are, the higher at risk we are. So anything we can do to minimize our exposure, even when it's our job to look at this, that counts. Like that is helpful in terms of sustaining us and protecting us so we can keep doing the work. But what you're doing is really, really hard. And I think you have my respect for how you're showing up every day. It's not easy. I hope that helps. I'm happy to answer, more questions, but maybe I can leave it there for right now.
Yes, that is very helpful. Actually, thank you so much, Jessica. I would say that this is part of my mindfulness approach on reducing my stress. So I don't want to open my social media too often every day, especially when I'm working because I lost focus. But yeah, I agree with what you said before about how social media doesn't give us platforms doesn't give us any boundaries, and we should try to make boundaries ourselves. I do have another question. It's about sensitivity. So, aside from the compassion fatigue that people deal with working in animal protection organizations, I do believe that some of us might have already brought a lot of things in their baggage, and it might already be taking a toll on us, making us more prone and sensitive in losing the balance and compassion. So, for people who have an existing mental condition, what would be the best first aid to help ourselves get out of the spiral? And what would be the best method to prevent ourselves from experiencing compassion fatigue in the first place? Or should we not be working in this?
Well, I think, we start by just being aware of our own history with mental illness, which is really common for lots of us, as well as being aware and honest about any past experiences we've had with trauma in our personal or professional lives, going back to our childhood, because we're bringing all of that with us to our work. And so anything that's unresolved or unhealed, untreated, that we're carrying from our past, it could be exacerbated by the high stress and the trauma exposed work that we're doing. Unhealed trauma in our own life really attracts all of the trauma that we're exposed to in our work. So someone once explained it to me like it's kindling for the fire. We're bringing a lot of fuel to the fire of all the trauma we're exposed to on the job. So I think the very best first aid is just to be honest with ourselves about our history and be proactive about reaching out for mental health help or for any sort of help healing our past experiences of trauma. And, I know that often includes talking to a doctor or a mental health therapist, but there are other pathways for help and healing that aren't necessarily around talk therapy or medication. So, for example, emotional freedom technique, which is usually called tapping, certain types of yoga and movement have all been shown to be helpful for addressing post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So, there are a lot of different modalities. Some are more body-based, some are more, talking with the therapist, that sort of thing. But most of us were going to need a little bit of help to heal or to get help for, what we're experiencing. But I think no matter what we're dealing with in our past, having really high self-awareness and good boundaries and consistent social support at work and at home are some of the most important factors that protect us from stress and compassion fatigue and trauma, or help us heal from some of those things that have happened to us. And so on top of, I think, talking about what individuals can do, it's really important for me to say that having a healthy workplace is also incredibly important in terms of our mental health and well-being. So, do we have a supportive manager? Do we have a reasonable workload, adequate pay, a flexible schedule? Do we get training on compassion fatigue and trauma? Those things are going to have a huge impact on our well-being and our mental health. And so we want to take that into account too. It's not just about like what we're doing as individuals. It's that end. It's also the workplace that we're in. So I think, your question was, what's the best method to prevent compassion fatigue? And to be honest, I'm not sure, or it wouldn't feel ethical for me to say I know how to prevent compassion fatigue completely. I think given the nature of the work that we do, many of us will experience it at some point in our careers, but there are still steps that we can take to mitigate its impact. So, for example, I think the quicker that you are to notice significant changes in the way that you're thinking, feeling, or behaving, that the quicker then you can intervene for yourself or get the help that you need. And that can help us from getting to a mental health crisis point. And sometimes that happens. We get to a point of crisis because we're so focused on taking care of others, of the animals and their needs and all of the work. There's so much work to do and there's never enough time to do it. So we're so focused outside of ourselves that we're just not paying attention to ourselves, and we're not setting boundaries with work. We're not asking for help. And the only way we pay attention to ourselves is when we are physically or mentally so unwell, we can no longer ignore, what's happening to us. And so it's not a small thing to pay better attention to yourself and notice those more subtle changes sooner so that hopefully we can, take action before we get into that crisis point. I also think it's important to say that having a history of mental illness or having struggles with mental illness now or trauma in your past, that doesn't mean that you are destined to experience compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma or burnout. And it doesn't mean that you can't be resilient or good at your job. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing this work. People who have done, I think, the really hard work of healing, who have support, who take their own self-care pretty seriously, are quite often some of the most resilient and skilled helpers that I know. And so, when we have that kind of history, we're able to draw on our own experiences of suffering, I think, to help us to have more empathy for others. It helps us to kind of loan our resilience to others. We were able to heal from what we've experienced, and we know that's possible for others. But in order to kind of get to that place, we need to help ourselves. We need to be honest about how we might be struggling and where we're at. And if we can, get that help for ourselves, I think it allows us to, in the future, be a really reliable, effective source of healing for other living beings. So it's a complicated question. I'm not a therapist, but I will say that I think a lot of us are struggling with what we've experienced in our past or the mental health challenges we're having right now. And too many of us are waiting far, far, far too long to reach out for help, years and years and years. And so I would just say there's no reason to wait. The sooner we can get some help, the better. There's no reason to suffer or struggle by yourself for any longer than you need to. So, yeah.
I just have to say that this podcast session feels like a therapy to me. So thank you so much. I learned a lot about a lot of things. And what I got from your explanation is that there is a possibility of turning your weakness, meaning, the mental situation that we are experiencing, to strength, because we are much more maybe resilient, and also we have a higher awareness on what we experience. Now, I want to ask you a question that for me, it's much more close to home. The years I spent studying overseas opened my eyes to the importance of prioritizing mental well being. And I realized that there is a significant disparity in mental health awareness between, the West countries and the East. While mental well-being is still not as prominent in Asia, awareness is growing, and various supporting methods and information are now being shared publicly. But I'm still unsure if people in Asia, particularly those from certain demographics and socioeconomic levels, take this seriously. So as something worth discussing and taking a break for. If mental well-being in Asia is still considered as a neglected issue, how can we effectively raise awareness about compassion fatigue, which now I know that it's not exactly a mental health issue, but more or less correlated to our mental well-being within animal protection organizations in Asia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had an easy answer, but I think what's happening in the East is just mirroring what we experienced in the West. So it took a really long time to get where we are right now. And still, there are so many organizations and people who think that helping professionals should just toughen up, and they don't put any value or importance on mental health for their workers. So I still hear that all the time now from people who are doing this work. But it has started to change quite a bit here in the West. And I think that is a combination of awareness and education and a lot of research that's been done on this subject over the last 30 years. I also see that there's been a big generational shift in the last 10 years here in the West. And so I think on some level, it takes time for this information to get out. And then like the different cultures of each generation relate to, I think, mental health a little bit differently. So I think it helps to just focus on increasing awareness that compassion fatigue is an occupational hazard. I mean, that's definitely where I started when I started doing this work 10 years ago, was trying to help, people understand that this comes with the territory of the work that we're doing, and that these changes that so many of us are experiencing are impacting our well-being. And again, it's related to the work that we're doing. And so I always think of it as like if it was a physical occupational hazard and our physical safety was at risk, we typically take that, really seriously. If we're working a job where we have the potential to get hurt, we take measures to keep our workers safe. And so trying to make that connection, it's the same. These are psychological, emotional, mental, and physical, safety risks that we're taking given the type of work that we're doing. And it's related to our job, and therefore we need to create some safety in our workplace. I mean, it should be said that not every single person is going to experience compassion fatigue, but it is just such a common consequence or outcome of engaging with this type of work. So when we think about the people who are drawn to this work, they tend to be very, very empathetic and sensitive. That's partially why they are so good at their jobs. So often it's the people who are doing great work that are most vulnerable to compassion fatigue. So we want to protect the people who are great at the work that they do when they're healthy and well. I find that the workers, the employees or volunteers, typically don't need any help in terms of like being convinced that they are experiencing compassion fatigue. They don't need that type of awareness because they know that they're hurting and they're open to learning more about it. They want to understand what they're experiencing in, a little bit better. I think it's so helpful. It was so helpful to me when I was experiencing all of this to finally have the right language to be able to understand and talk about what I was feeling and experiencing. So I think that the resistance or the work that needs to be done for the staff or employees, volunteers, it's not so much about like awareness building as it is around helping them break through some of the resistance they might have towards doing the things that we know can be helpful for them. Setting boundaries so that they can take breaks and rest is really difficult when the work is never done and there are always more animals who are suffering and need our care. So they're struggling with a lot of guilt, and there's a lot that gets in the way of doing what we know would be helpful for us. And sometimes it's our working conditions. Again, though, I'll say that mini course that we're offering for free can, I think, speak to some of those challenges that we have around the struggles that we have to make peace with taking care of ourselves when the animals need us. But I think it's important that when we think about how we're going to convince people to take this seriously or how we're going to raise awareness, it's really important that we move past or that we don't repeat a mistake that was made in the West. For many, many years, we framed compassion fatigue as an individual issue that could be solved with self-care and self-care alone. And the research disproved that. Self-care is important. It's a critical part of our resilience. But the research showed us over the last, couple of decades that we also, and very importantly, what's going to make a huge difference for compassion fatigue and trauma related to work is our working conditions. And that's not even talking about burnout. Our working conditions really are just a key part of our ability to address compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma effectively. So animal protection organizations often do need to be convinced that it is in their best interest to care and invest in their workers. So I think, if I could talk to people who are in leadership roles, board members right now, stress, compassion fatigue, trauma, burnout in your staff is absolutely going to affect your organization's ability to effectively meet your mission. Turnover, absenteeism, sick leave, conflict in teams, all the drama that comes up when people are suffering, exhaustion, emotional dysregulation. This is going to cause problems in any organization that costs a lot in terms of resources money and time, to address these things. So if our workers are not well, if your workers are not well, the quality of the work that they do is going to decline. And so is their ability to care for the animals effectively, to work as a team, cohesively, ethically. We start to make mistakes. And as an organization, we're going to struggle to move our mission forward. So I'm hoping that people in leadership positions who have the institutional power to make changes to working conditions, things like staffing levels, pay, workload, that they start to understand that animal welfare and worker welfare are inextricably linked to each other and that they're equally important. So if we value the humane and compassionate care of animals, why as organizations do we often ignore the basic welfare of our workers? And to be clear, we as organizations, we're not here to heal our staff. We're not therapists. We're not doctors. You're not responsible for treating your staff's mental health, but you are responsible for supporting them so that they can do their best quality work for the animals and your mission. So I would say, I hope that you don't replicate some of the mistakes we've made in the West, which is we've just taken a really long time to understand that we cannot make this just an individual problem and solution. There has to be self-care and we care, institutional care. We need our organizations to take, working conditions and worker safety and well-being on the job really seriously. And so just like we're working to stop the exploitation of animals, we also need to stop exploiting our workers' passion and their extraordinary empathy for animals and start taking their needs and their capacity and welfare seriously. And so I think that that makes sense. Like that is in line with our values as a field in animal welfare and protection work. Our compassion, our commitment to caring for animals naturally can include caring for the human beings who are doing this really difficult work. So that's my hope for what might happen for you all, that you don't make some of the same mistakes that we made as we try to address this issue for our field.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I just have to share my experience with everyone here. Before Asia for Animals, I did not give extra attention to my mental well-being, especially when it comes to work, whether it is professional or not. So when I joined Asia for Animals, I had a moment of culture shock because here in Asia, stuff like compassion fatigue is not really relevant. It's not in our working culture or even, like just the general culture. So I'm very grateful that now that I joined Asia for Animals, my mind is much more open to the idea of mental well-being. And of course, I have raised quite a high awareness to myself as well on this compassion fatigue. So I totally agree with what you have been saying until now. So this would be my last question, and it's quite a short one compared to the ones that I have. What are the signs that we should look out that indicates, okay, maybe I need to take a break from this, or in the extreme case, maybe I should step away from this work?
Okay, so I'll try to keep this short. So I would just say if you notice significant ongoing changes in your thoughts, feelings, and or behaviors, if you don't feel like yourself, if your thoughts or your feelings or your behavior feel out of control, like it doesn't feel normal for you. And I'm not talking about just stress. I'm talking about something that really feels like beyond normal stress for you. If you're struggling to function, if you're feeling, hopeless, if you're thinking about hurting yourself, if you're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, these are all, things that we need to take seriously in terms of taking action on our own behalf. So I can't say for any of you, specifically, But if you're worried about yourself, if things feel really out of control for yourself, I think that's a really good time to set some limits around work and get the help that maybe you really need and deserve. So again, I promise that we'll talk more about specific symptoms in the mini course, not to keep bringing you back to that, but it will save us an hour in this podcast. So there's a long list of specific symptoms that we can look for. But again, I would just say you all know yourself. Everybody's symptoms or changes will be a little bit different. What compassion fatigue looks like in me could look a little bit different in you. And so it's really about, again, that high self-awareness and knowing how this is really not like me. Even when I'm stressed or when I've struggled in the past, I haven't felt this way or thought this way or been acting like this. That's a really good sign that it's time to maybe take a break.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both for sharing such personal insights and intimate experiences and the knowledge. Though it may sound very therapeutical, but I truly hope that these real life experiences, these exchanges offer valuable support and inspiration to all our listeners. A point I would like to expand, like just a short one, about when Jessica made about how the suffering we carry with us from maybe, from before can become a source of strength. In my own personal journey, quite a few years ago, as I faced like my own struggles and trauma, even though it wasn't within the animal welfare industry, I learned and grew to practice like the power of self awareness, and most importantly, the realization that I am enough. Things I do is enough, because I find that that's really important, because in today's societal norms, it is not easy to work within the boundaries of I have done enough, or that I am enough. What I've done for my work today is enough, for the animals and all, let alone accept that fact, especially in our industry that seems to be always engulfed in suffering. So ironically, I practice and repeat this to myself every day, this thought, given the current circumstance and available resources and my capabilities at this point of time, every minute action of mine will bring a ripple effect collectively. I thank you for today, because today is another new day for me to do more good. I do this every day, and it helps teach the mind to take on a different perspective. And I hope it helps the listeners. Well, before we close, will anyone like to leave a final thought to our listeners? Jessica, Winaya, take our turns.
I think that's really beautiful what you just shared, Eileen. I think it's so important to bring that kind of perspective to yourself and your efforts. And so I think I would just say, to kind of close, one of the most powerful things that we can do is to offer ourselves compassion. That's why I call my program Compassion in Balance. It's balancing the immense compassion that you all have for animals with an equal amount of compassion for yourselves. That's really where the power is for us in being kind to ourselves. It's balancing compassion also with equanimity, the wisdom to kind of understand what it is that we're able to do and what our limits are, just like Eileen was describing. And so having that balance of having a huge open heart with kind of the realities of what we're working with and the equanimity to accept that. And so I think my closing would just be to say thank you for all of you who are doing such difficult and critical work in the different corners of the world that you're in. I may not know you, but I feel like I understand your heart, and I really just appreciate how you're trying to show up in this really challenging world. And so thank you. And please, please take really good care of yourself and each other. You all deserve it.
I might not give any inputs, that I would like to reiterate what I had gathered from this podcast session. So now I understand that being self-aware of yourself, of what you are working on, is really important. Trying out new strategies to de-stress is also important, but it does take quite a lot of effort, a lot of changing yourself in a way that it might be out of your routine, but it is a necessary effort to find the balance within you. And what I also understand is that compassion between workers is also important and can be significant to our quality in our work. So it's not only giving compassion to the animals we work with, but also to our fellow colleagues to have a good harmony. And of course, to not have compassion fatigue too often. That is it.
Thank you. Thank you both again. Thank you, everyone, for joining Jessica, Winaya, and myself on this journey of empathy and awareness. If you found this episode beneficial, I encourage everyone to share it with your friends and colleagues. I sincerely feel that there's many of us who have been searching for resolutions, and we hope to provide you with that through CIB Asia. Once again, this unique partnership between Jessica and AFA is proud to bring you a mini course on compassion fatigue. It is due for launch in October and it is free for all AFA network members. For updates about the course and to follow more of Jessica's work, please visit us at www.asiaforanimals.com/CIB Asia. We release AFA podcast episodes every week around a wide variety of topics, so make sure to check those out. You can find our podcast episodes on a variety of platforms, or simply visit us at www.asiaforanimals.com/podcast for all the details and past recordings. Thank you for listening and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.